A woman walked into a weathered auto repair shop carrying nothing but a faded resume, a worn leather bag, and the kind of quiet dignity that only survives after life has taken almost everything away. She thought she was applying for a bookkeeping job. Instead, before she could even finish introducing herself, the owner looked at the empty office, glanced toward the little girl coloring beside the toolbox, and said with exhausted honesty that stunned everyone nearby, "I need a wife, not an employee." For one impossible second, the entire shop fell silent, not because the words were cruel, but because they carried the unbearable weight of years of loneliness, sacrifice, and a father who had forgotten how to ask for help any other way. If you believe kindness can heal broken hearts, forgiveness can rebuild broken lives, and hope deserves a second chance, please like this video, leave a thoughtful comment, share it with someone who needs encouragement today, and subscribe to our channel so our community can continue sharing emotional stories that remind our family that compassion still exists in the world. The owner of the garage was a hard-working mechanic named Garrett Holloway, a broad-shouldered man with grease permanently settled into the lines of his hands and grief permanently settled behind his eyes. 5 years earlier, his wife had passed away after a sudden illness that left him alone to raise his 7-year-old daughter, Marin. Since then, Garrett had transformed his small-town auto shop into both his workplace and his home away from home. Customers admired his honesty, but few understood the cost behind his smile. Every morning began before sunrise, preparing breakfast, packing school lunches, opening the garage, answering calls, ordering parts, helping customers, attending school events during lunch breaks, then rushing back before afternoon appointments. Every hour of daylight belonged to someone else. He barely remembered what it felt like to simply sit down. His daughter had become the brightest light in the shop. Marin knew the names of every wrench, every socket, and every customer who visited regularly. She welcomed strangers with cheerful smiles that softened even the grumpiest faces. Yet behind those smiles lived a quiet wish she never spoke aloud. Whenever another child's mother visited the garage, Marin watched from a distance with eyes that carried questions she was too gentle to ask. Garrett noticed those looks every single time, and each one carved another invisible scar across his heart. The woman standing in front of him that afternoon was named Celeste Rowan. She was 36 years old and had once managed finances for a successful manufacturing company before corporate downsizing erased her position. Months of searching had emptied her savings. She had sold jewelry inherited from her grandmother, moved into a tiny apartment, and taken temporary jobs that barely paid enough to survive. Yet she refused to surrender her pride. She dressed neatly every morning, carried herself with quiet confidence, and believed that honest work would eventually find her. When Garrett realized how his words sounded, embarrassment washed across his face. He apologized immediately, explaining that he desperately needed office help but had been overwhelmed trying to balance business, parenting, cooking, cleaning, paperwork, and raising a little girl who deserved far more attention than he could give. His awkward confession made Celeste smile for the first time in weeks. Instead of walking away offended, she recognized not an arrogant man but an exhausted father whose loneliness had escaped before his judgment could stop it. Garrett hired her that same afternoon. Within days, the garage changed in ways nobody expected. Bills were organized. Customer records became accurate. Suppliers were paid on time. Appointment schedules finally made sense. The office, once buried beneath towers of receipts and dusty folders, became bright and welcoming. Customers began arriving not only because Garrett repaired vehicles honestly but because the entire place suddenly felt alive again. More importantly, Marin found someone who listened. During lunch breaks, Celeste helped her with homework at the small desk near the office window. They planted flowers in old tire planters outside the garage entrance. They laughed over simple sandwiches while Garrett continued repairing engines nearby. Those ordinary afternoons slowly stitched together something that all three of them had been missing. The town noticed. Unfortunately, not everyone celebrated the change. Garrett's older brother, Preston Holloway, had always believed emotions were distractions. He had repeatedly pressured Garrett to sell the garage, arguing that a larger automotive chain wanted the property. Preston viewed every relationship as a business transaction and every sacrifice as weakness. When he saw Celeste becoming part of the shop's daily life, He assumed she was manipulating Garrett for financial security. Without speaking to either of them, Preston began spreading rumors throughout town. He suggested that Celeste had targeted a vulnerable widower. He whispered that she wanted ownership of the business. Small communities often move faster than truth, and before long curious looks replaced warm greetings. Celeste heard every rumor. Instead of defending herself publicly, she simply worked harder. She arrived earlier each morning, balanced every account perfectly, remembered every customer's name, and quietly ignored the gossip. Garrett apologized repeatedly, but she reminded him that people often judged stories they had never bothered to understand. Then an unexpected crisis struck. A regional insurance company accused Garrett's garage of fraudulent repair invoices connected to several vehicles serviced years earlier, before Celeste had ever worked there. Frozen payments threatened to bankrupt the shop within weeks. Garrett faced legal expenses he could never afford. While reviewing thousands of old financial records, Celeste noticed something strange. Several invoices contained signatures that appeared authentic but had been processed through a third-party contractor Preston had recommended years before. Digging deeper, she discovered altered paperwork redirecting reimbursements through shell accounts before payments reached the garage. Garrett had unknowingly become the victim rather than the criminal. The discovery shocked everyone. Instead of protecting himself, Preston had hidden his own reckless financial decisions inside Garrett's business records years earlier, believing nobody would ever examine them closely. Celeste spent entire afternoons organizing evidence with extraordinary patience. She contacted former suppliers, retrieved archived documents, compared transaction dates, and built a complete timeline proving Garrett's innocence. When investigators reviewed her work, the accusations against Garrett collapsed almost immediately. The garage survived. Preston faced the consequences of his own deception. Garrett expected to feel victorious. Instead, he simply felt tired. He looked across the shop one quiet afternoon as sunlight streamed through the open garage doors. Marin sat beside Celeste drawing colorful pictures of smiling families holding hands beneath enormous blue skies. Garrett realized something remarkable had happened without anyone planning it. The garage no longer echoed with loneliness. It echoed with laughter. Weeks later, the annual town charity vehicle inspection event arrived. Garrett volunteered free safety inspections for elderly residents, while Celeste organized donations for struggling families needing transportation repairs. Mechanics from neighboring towns joined them. Local restaurants donated lunches. Children played nearby while volunteers worked together under bright afternoon sunshine. Near the end of the event, an elderly woman approached Celeste with tears filling her eyes. Years earlier, before losing her corporate position, Celeste had quietly paid for emergency vehicle repairs after discovering the woman could not afford transportation to cancer treatments. She had never mentioned the kindness to anyone. The elderly woman remembered. She publicly thanked Celeste in front of dozens of volunteers. One after another, other people stepped forward sharing stories of anonymous generosity that somehow always traced back to Celeste. School supplies for struggling children. Grocery deliveries during difficult winters. Quiet financial assistance without seeking recognition. Garrett stood speechless. The woman others had accused of chasing money had spent years secretly giving away what little she possessed. That afternoon transformed more than reputations. It transformed hearts. Even Preston, now humbled after accepting responsibility for his actions, approached Garrett privately. Shame covered his face far more heavily than anger ever had. He admitted that jealousy had poisoned his judgment because Garrett possessed something success had never given him. A family built on love rather than ambition. Garrett forgave him, not because Preston deserved immediate trust, but because carrying resentment any longer would only steal more joy from tomorrow. Months passed beneath warm daylight skies. Business flourished. Families recommended the garage to friends. Young apprentices asked Garrett for mentorship because his shop had become known not merely for excellent repairs but for honesty, compassion, and second chances. One peaceful afternoon after closing early for Marin's school celebration, Garrett found himself remembering the words that had embarrassed him months before. "I need a wife, not an employee." Back then those words had come from desperation. Now they meant something entirely different, not because he needed someone to rescue him, not because he feared loneliness, but because he had finally learned that love grows strongest where respect arrives first. He asked Celeste if she would consider building a future with him, not as someone filling an empty position, but as the person who had already become an irreplaceable part of their lives through kindness, patience, and unwavering integrity. She accepted with tears of quiet happiness. Maren wrapped her arms around both of them before either adult could say another word. For the first time in years, Garrett no longer worried about tomorrow. He looked toward it with hope. Before this story comes to its close, take a moment to leave a meaningful comment. Tell us what touched your heart the most. Do you believe forgiveness is stronger than revenge, or do you think trust must always be earned again? Your thoughts may encourage someone reading them today who desperately needs hope. Their wedding was simple, held during a bright afternoon surrounded by neighbors, customers, old friends, and children who had watched the little garage become something far greater than a business. There were no extravagant decorations, no luxurious displays, and no perfect fairy tale promises. There were only honest smiles, grateful hearts, repaired relationships, and a little girl who finally felt complete. The old garage sign remained exactly where it had always stood, weathered but proud, reminding everyone who passed that broken things are not always meant to be replaced. Sometimes they are carefully repaired, strengthened, and loved even more because of the cracks they survived. Garrett learned that asking for help was never weakness. Celeste discovered that losing one life sometimes leads to finding another. Maren proved that hope can patiently wait until love finally finds its way home. And everyone who knew their story understood that the greatest repairs are never made beneath the hood of a car. They happen quietly inside hearts willing to forgive, willing to trust again, and willing to believe that even after life's hardest seasons, happiness can still arrive in the middle of an ordinary afternoon. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Thank you for being part of our community and our family, where every story reminds us that kindness, courage, and second chances can change a life forever.